We're back at Pragmatic Optimists to talk about just what political violence looks like. This is a developing story, but about an hour before we started recording today on September 24th, there were reports of a shooting at a Dallas ICE facility. At least 2 people in custody, i.e. detainees of ICE, have been confirmed to be shot. There's at least 1 fatality. Early reports indicate that that is the gunman who suffered a self-inflicted wound. And as we've been talking on and on about political violence in this country, what we are missing, I think, over and over again, hopefully not here on Pragmatic Optimists, is that most of the violence, political violence in this country is actually waged by the state against scapegoated minorities, like immigrants, like the people who were in ICE custody in this moment. I also want to talk today about media literacy and the way that mainstream media continues to accept whatever comes out of the Trump administration as fact. And I'll start by giving props to a mainstream media organization, CNN, which is reporting that the motive of the shooter is as yet unknown, that they were shooting from a building across the street, so functionally a sniper. But Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, is already tweeting that the motive is unknown, but there are unprecedented assaults on our brave ICE officers. JD Vance is tweeting the same kind of things. And there are mainstream organizations, the BBC, I was reading because I was looking for additional sources talking about potential motive, given that it seems like at this point, the people targeted were only people in custody. And BBC is running full tweets by Kristi Noem, by JD Vance, saying, you know, these attacks on ICE enforcement have to stop. These assaults on ICE officers are rising. They're encouraged by the other side. That's bullshit. Like, you can probably hear in my voice how angry I am, because to take the layers of violence present in one, being disappeared by ICE officials as we are rolling back due process protections, as the Supreme Court is allowing racial profiling, as we've talked about on this show, as over and over again, we're seeing citizens detained. We're seeing threats about where people are going to be deported to try to scare them into self-deportation, regardless of whether or not they have a good case to be legally allowed to stay in this country. They can barely access the courts to make their cases. And so that's level of violence number 1. And then we have level of violence number 2, where the rhetoric and the actual violence by the state against people in ICE custody are taken by, and again, the motive is unclear, but we've seen over and over again this violent rhetoric talking about how people who are in custody are violent criminals, are worthy of deportation, manufacturing consent to ship them off to a torture facility in a country that is currently also ruled by an authoritarian dictator, El Salvador and Bukele. And so we can't be sure on the motive, but we know that we have an environment in this country where it is viewed as almost admirable and patriotic in swaths of the country to attack hardworking immigrants who are here simply because they were not born in this country. And then we have a third layer of violence perpetrated by not only the government, but also by many members of the media and the Fourth Estate that are taking this incident and weaponizing it further to manufacture more consent by not questioning what is coming out of the White House. And I've spoken on this for a little bit, and you can probably tell by even the speed at which I'm speaking that I could go for a lot longer. So Tiara, I'm very curious about your read on media literacy in this country and the responsibilities of the media as they're covering things that are coming out of the Trump White House.
Yeah. So, Rachel, I think one of the other things that I want to highlight in this moment is that Rep. Pramila Jayapal recently made a statement that there have been 14 people under this Trump administration, 14 ICE detainees who have died while in ICE custody. We just recently had, as you mentioned, less than an hour ago of a recording today on Wednesday, September 24th, reports of 2 more potential ICE detainees who have been killed while in ICE custody. We also have reports not covered by mainstream news that the people who were detained at Alligator Alcatraz and the concentration camp that they have there, thousands of people are now literally gone, disappeared. There are members of communities, family members who have been disappeared by their communities and sent to an ICE facility that has now been shut down in Florida, but we have no record of where those people have gone. So in addition to the state violence that is not covered, there are stories and there is no media coverage about some of the most critical stories of people in our communities. And I think it would be disingenuous for us to have a conversation about state level violence, about ICE detainees, without highlighting the media's role in disappearing stories and disappearing people. And that's why recently I was listening to a podcast by Dr. David Johns, who had a member of the Black press, Black journalists, who were highlighting that in moments like these, it is more important to support independent media. We've seen attacks on free speech. We have also recently seen in like the last week or so, the Pentagon has now required journalists to sign on to letters saying that they will not report out even unclassified information without pre-approval. We now have the Pentagon saying, if you want to report on what's going on in here, it has to be pre-approved, which means we no longer have independent media. We have the concentration of media, large media conglomerates that are now owned by just a few organizations. And so we can no longer, as Americans, trust mainstream media in the ways that we have sometimes in certain communities been able to trust, but now in a majority of communities, an increasing number of communities, can no longer trust that the stories that we are hearing are stories that capture the full breadth of what is happening in our country. It is a shame that thousands of people are missing and almost no coverage. It is a shame that 14 people have died in ICE custody, and we have Congress members who are saying, where are the reports and what is happening? And we're spending more time listening to J.D. Vance and Kristi Noem create stories, fake stories, or unsubstantiated stories, a la the FBI director saying, oh, we got him, we don't got him, to create and sow more seeds of chaos and discord. And there is a lot going on that people can pay attention to. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and the most targeted communities for misinformation are minority communities. These are low-income Black and Brown immigrant communities who are targeted with misinformation. So I encourage our viewers, our Praggies, to really seek out independent media, search out journalists who are not in the mainstream, look at what and how Black journalists and Latino journalists and Southeast Asian voices are covering these stories, and really try to complement the push notifications that you're receiving about the top headlines with local coverage and with more independent journalists, because we know we are not getting the full story. And we know now that the attacks on the free press and attacks on our First Amendment in a multitude of ways are going to continue. So I encourage everyone to really find your local media, invest in your local media if you have the extra means, and also try to diversify the types of people who are covering the news that you most seek, whether it is their personal background, their ethnic background, their racial background, the language that they are covering it in, because media literacy at this moment is not to be trusted, and encouraging your family members, your the young people in your lives, the people who are not as savvy as navigating the media, to really question everything. This is the moment, friends, Praggies, where we have to question everything. Who are the voices that we're hearing from the most? Who are the voices that are being silent? And Rachel, I want to kick it back to you as we wrap up this episode. What is keeping you hopeful, or what are you really paying attention to? And what are some of the stories in your mind that you want to follow up on?
I think I'm going to leave with some genuine optimism, but before I do want to give just a couple more threads that we're pulling, a couple more connections that we want to make for listen, you've got all that yarn behind you. This is a thread pulling show. I think what the kind of Pentagon announcement made me think of in particular is the way that Gaza has been closed to international journalists who were not already present. You have to go in with an Israeli military accompaniment. And I think it's a powerful reminder, and we're going to continue talking about Gaza on our next episode. I think it's a powerful reminder that what is the test run in places like Gaza and also like Congo and Sudan and all of these places that still don't break through despite the horrors that are happening there as well. That is a testing ground for what will be allowed in it will come for us all eventually, right? And that's why we need to be standing up for everyone all the time. And that can seem really exhausting, but it's actually kind of this, I think, through line that makes it a little bit easier, is that you don't have to sit and be like, well, how do I really feel about people's rights for XYZ? There are complex policy issues that come from identity and that come from positionality in the world, but it's not complex to have a foundation of, I think everyone has human rights and access to due process. And so that's my additional pessimistic thread. But the optimism that I want to leave people with today is, in this kind of media literacy dynamic, I think sometimes it can feel like the only place to get accurate news is from shows like ours or influencers. And I want to really caution people on that as well, because we're happy to be here, but we are functionally commenters that are getting our news from people who are reporting it back on the ground. Sometimes we do some original like reporting, but that is very local to where Tiara or I live. And so I have seen and relied extensively on independent local media. And we're very lucky to have a robust tradition of that in Chicago, including The Tribe is a Black-owned independent news source. Block Club Chicago is a really excellent news source for any Chicago listeners. But I think the thing that really drives home just how important that kind of local, I think the Chicago Sun-Times is still independent. And those journalists and newsrooms have been collecting information. They have like a Chicago journalists collective that takes all the videos and all the pictures and all the reports of ICE out in the community and holds them for litigation or shares them with consent once they're confirmed to alert the community. And so I think that there is a lot of utility in following commenters like us who you trust. And I encourage you to do so and to like, subscribe, follow here on YouTube, on Substack. I have my own independent Substack and also write for Legal AFs sometimes. And that's a great way to financially support directly. But also show up for the people who are trained in journalism, who have been building out these newsrooms for a long time, because that's where I get a lot of my news. And I think that I often heard for years independent media and thought of like people operating by themselves in a vacuum. And in reality, there are really excellent independent newsrooms that still exist across this country and that you can go and support and that are doing outstanding work. So we're going to continue the conversation of the kind of erosion of human rights swallowing us all. Okay, that's not an optimistic note to leave on. We love independent media. We're happy to be independent commenters, and stick around.
Bye, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.